The following Camera Canada production has been made possible through the kind cooperation of the American Federation of Musicians of the United States and Canada. On a day in June, a young lady left her summer job as a waitress in Victoria, BC. She paused for a last look at the harbor, then turned away towards the bus terminal and the ferry dock. An hour and a half later, she was crossing the Strait of Georgia. Her name was Corinne Field, and in her head was the sound of music. 5,000 miles away, beside another ocean, a young man named Evan von Williams left his summer cottage some 22 miles south from Halifax, and he too heard the music. In Quebec City, Lise Amand said farewell to 9 brothers and sisters and set out on her westward journey toward the other Canada. At Downsview Airport, Sergeant Darrell Eaton went on leave. And on a prairie station platform, Van Jonathan Uglum waited for a train. A few days later, they met on the campus of the University of Toronto. Altogether, there were 92 of them, and all together, they made a sound like this. They came from every part of Canada, from the seacoasts and the mountains, from the industrial cities of the south and the mining towns of the north. During the month of July, they rehearsed here in the concert halls and the practice rooms of the Edward Johnson Building. And in August, they went on tour, the most extraordinary tour ever undertaken by a Canadian symphony orchestra. In Winnipeg, More than 3,000 people jammed the auditorium to hear them. In Saskatoon, the audience came from hundreds of miles around, and a violin collector brought a $35,000 Guarnerius just to hear it played by the young concertmaster. In Calgary, loudspeakers were turned on in the foyer so that the overflow crowd could hear the concert. And in Vancouver, enthusiasm ran so high that they arranged a grand street parade. In Victoria, people sat for 2 solid hours in the rain, waiting for the final concert by Canada's National Youth Orchestra. Our cameras were there, front stage and backstage, during this short, sweet summer of music. The music began before they ever met on stage. Began, in fact, on the trains that brought them from the west and from the east. 12 members of the orchestra came from British Columbia. Among them, Brian Grofrere of New Westminster. And 18-year-old George Laverock of Burnaby, who yearned for a trumpet that would make that big American sound. Miss Joan Meredith of the city of Victoria, who piped the delegation through the Rockies, to be joined at Edmonton by 8 from Alberta. Among 7 Calgarians, Alec Nichol, whose double bass proved incompatible with an upper berth. He crossed the prairie in a private car, where the CNR's rules were somewhat bent, but never quite fractured. The youngest members of the orchestra came from the west. 15-year-old Van Uglum of Swift Current, Saskatchewan, and Jamie Thompson of Richmond, BC, also 15. It has been said that Manitoba's chief exports are wheat and string players.
All aboard?
6 of the string players got aboard at Winnipeg. All of them young, all of them pretty. Miss Patricia Martin of the University of Manitoba, a music teacher in the making. They improvised some uncertain Mozart in the swaying aisles, even gave an impromptu concert at a station platform at Sioux Lookout. And went silent for the last day's journey through the lakes of northern Ontario. The Westerners reached Toronto exactly 1 hour before the train from the Maritimes in Quebec. And the following morning, East met West on the stage of the Macmillan Theatre. Neophytes and veterans found their places. For most, it was their first exposure to the exacting conditions of symphony playing. And they awaited, some of them nervously, some of them calmly, the arrival of the maestro. Fergus Haywood, 18, of Victoria, whose parents gave him a drum at the age of 4, and for whom the beat has never quite stopped. Promptly at 9, Walter Susskind mounted the podium, and the session was underway.
We'll start with the Brahms Symphony this morning. Now, of course, you all know who Brahms was. I won't tell you his life story. But one thing is important to know, that Brahms was what we call a middle romantic composer, together with, say, Wagner and Tchaikovsky and Dvorak. And therefore, generally speaking, his music should be played not with as much of a classical and restrained feeling as, say, the early romantics like Mendelssohn or Schubert or Weber. On the other hand, not with such an exaggerated emotionalism as we would play the late romantics like Richard Strauss or Mahler or Sibelius. That, I think, is all I want to say in general. The rest we do in detail. Well, we'll do a little bit of that, see how it goes. Now, it goes in 6, something like...
For Walter Susskind, this was the culmination of an idea that he himself had brought from Great Britain some 7 years before.
Try a little bit. Very strong the timpani, all right? Now. Up to here. In the 9/8 bar, I would like you to notice something which occurs hundreds of times in all kinds of pieces and is very rarely marked, and yet we have to do it. Look, consider this. We have been playing a rather big forte espressivo, and that was fine, sounded good. Now, in the 9/8 bar, you see those who are playing a whole bar's crescendo in it, for 9 beats. And that arrives again at the forte. So such a thing automatically requires that we drop down a little bit when we start that bar, although it's not printed. In other words, when you are playing loud and you see a crescendo, generally speaking, we drop down a little bit and start a little bit softer to enable us to do that crescendo. Now, I would like you to try the timpani with both hands and play both sticks on the drum for each beat. You know, not alternating like that, but bang, bang, bang. Just try that once for me at the beginning. It's much better now, you see. The strings, all strings with the exception of the basses, play what I might call a sustained forte. That means, and that's difficult, and it's not so easy to do on rehearsal, but I must tell you, because not all of you have the experience of applying it later on the concert. The entry of the 3rd and 4th horn in the very first bar, you see, can be very mighty indeed. You're the only ones in the whole orchestra who enter on that 4th beat, you see, so that we hear from the rest of the orchestra, "Tya," and suddenly, "Tya," you see, like a new entry, you see, with a lot of power. Now let's try it once more, and we'll probably go on a little bit further. Once more from the beginning. Exactly the same tempo. Just a second. The pizzicato is a little bit too aggressive for me. It's a little bit too, yes, it must be a gentle pizzicato, you see. You know, the 6/8 bar after the 9/8, I want to show you something. The first violins and the violas. Try it once, play the first note and then the 3 pizzicato without vibrato, quite dry. Try that once, yes? No vibrato at all, just the first and violas. And 1. Right, now do the same thing and do a vibrato on each note, yes? Once more. Yes, you are plucking too hard still. It's still a little bit too hard. Yes, that's right, yes. Not this angry plucking away, you know, but slightly sideways, you see? That's right. Could we all go from the 6/8 bar after the 9/8? And 1. That's good now. Now, violins. Now. That's good, that pizzicato now, yes.
Crescendo, decrescendo, piano, piano, stay, stay, less, 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 less. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1.
The later success of the NYO owed a great deal to the 12 instructors who trained the individual sections of the orchestra. In the international world of music, Fred Zimmerman of the New York Philharmonic is recognized as one of the greatest bass players in North America today. His language, as well as his vitality, are typically American.
Now, in speaking of placing the bow, we're going to refer to the bow in sections. This is the 10-yard line, 50-yard line, this is the 90. So that when I say 20 to 50, you know what information I'm trying to give you. Now, in this bowing, which is the George bowing, we start at the 20, and at this speed we go to the 60, lift your bow, come back to the 20, play the 16ths. Now, we had the Mary bowing, 2 notes tied, 2 separate, 50-50, stay, stay, 50-50, stay, stay. We know the design. We had the Sam bowing, 50-50, 50-50. The Gertrude bowing was 4 notes in a bow, 25, 25, 25. Now let's try this. Let's try the George bowing here. We'll just play E flats, a quarter note, and 4 16ths. 3, 4. Come back, back, back.
The bass, said Zimmerman, is still a relatively unexplored instrument, highly capable of carrying a melodic line. He not only imparted technique to the long-limbed members of his section, but inspired several composers to write new works for the double bass.
4, 2, 4, 2, 4. Let's try that. 3, 4, 4, 2, 4, 2, 4, 4, 2, 4, 2, 4. Once more. 4, 2, 4, 2, 4. Now let's continue. 4, 2, 4, 2, 4, 1, 1, 0, 1.
Non, pas là, avant ça. Harmonic, je voudrais. Harmonic.
The instructor, one of America's finest concert violinists, Sidney Hart of Chicago.
That's not enough. As I say là. Pam, pam, pam. Oui, c'est le commencement du concert pour nous, vous savez. No, don't slide there.
Now, in the old days, we violists were considered as disappointed violinists, but that is not true today. That was a joke they used to make in the old days. Is that right? But we don't hear that. We don't hear that as often today.
The violas, coached by Stephen
let's
Kondak,
all play this
principal
together.
of the Montreal Symphony and member of McGill's Faculty of Music.
Starting at 20. Ready? 1, 2, 3. One.
Bear Capper, percussionist with the Toronto Symphony, and Joanna Jacks, 18, of Don Mills, Ontario.
I want to try this a little bit slower. All right? How about this tempo? 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Very good. That's fine. How do you like the Harriano suite?
Well, I like it, but for practicing, you know, it's one thing to practice it by yourself and another to rehearse it with the orchestra.
It's fun, that's for sure.
6 months earlier, Walter Susskind traveled across the country, visiting major studios and conservatories, and listening to more than 230 candidates between the ages of 14 and 24. The finalists were selected by their own music teachers from almost 1,000 students across Canada. In the late spring, the final decisions were made about the two major works to be played, Brahms first, and the First Symphony of Shostakovich, written while he was still a youth of 19, studying at the Moscow Conservatory. The chauffeur, a talented American dancer whose name was Diane Hartman before it became Mrs. Walter Susskind.
This is a difficult question to ask. How do you feel about the two symphonies that we're playing? The Brahms, I don't want to say verses, I can't think of another word. The Shostakovich.
Shostakovich. I like something that's colder. The Brahms is a little bit sloppy as far as I'm concerned.
No. That's not true.
No, that's the way I feel. I prefer something a little
What
more
kind of music
austere.
do you like?
I like modern music.
Just modern
I don't think you
As
compare
opposed
the
to,
two
I
at
prefer
all.
modern music as opposed to romantic music.
Oh,
The so-called romantic era.
Well,
I like
I
impressionistic
disagree.
music.
no, Jim,
Why do
I
you
don't-
disagree? Why?
I don't think Brahms is it's a romantic type. It's really in harmony and
Oh, it's very classical.
yeah.
In form,
In form,
yes.
certainly.
But in its style, it's very romantic, it's very free.
It's too
Oh,
perfect,
yeah.
I think.
And
I think it's too perfect.
It's too perfect. Wow.
Yes.
Well, how
Why?
Well, the opening is sort of a big thing that
it's
it just
great.
expands and it keeps expanding and expanding. The very opening of the piece, I think.
Would you
it makes
rather
me
have the
just-
opening of the
Look,
summer?
Jim, that's the beauty of it.
No, I don't like the opening of the Summers. I like the opening of the Shostakovich. I prefer that
That's
best
not
of
me.
anything they play.
Not me.
Not just because I play it, but I think it's the best written.
Oh, that's the reason.
But then who am I to pass judgment?
And anyway, in any case, you can't compare them, really. It's just a question of which you prefer. And pretty soon, how do we know in 20 years or 30 years or something, the turn of the century, we may all, the people may all like the Shostakovich much more.
I don't think so.
It's all these modern pieces going for percussion work.
Yeah.
That's good. This is more rhythm.
Yeah, I think
That's
they had
the main thing.
they made a great step, you know, in percussion since 50 years.
Don't you think the percussion and the rhythm in this and the lyric is fantastic?
Oui, c'est bien.
C'est bien. I don't understand.
It's good, she said.
Oh, it's good. Oh, we should learn to speak French, you know. We really should.
Well, you know, a lot of us are.
Right.
Well, it's been said before that music goes around in a circle. We're starting to get back. Vaughan Williams was modal. He wrote in a very modal style, which was pre-Baroque. Very pre-Baroque. Gabrielli wrote in modes, and even before Gabrielli, it was all this. And then Vaughan Williams brought it back just after the Impressionistic period,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole tone scale and that.
But do you think Brahms gonna...
Oh no,
gonna
I think
listen to
Brahms will
or
always be
Bach
great. I think Brahms will always be great. You mean, do I think it'll get around to Brahms style
Yes,
again?
yes.
I don't
Brahms
know. It depends on how far we go. Right now, electronic music is starting, and this what do they call it? Chance music? So I don't know how much
chance
about
music.
that. But you know how they're getting away from any sort of
They're getting away
system
from
at all.
music. That's what they do.
Yeah.
A guy sort of holds a watch up and kicks the piano. And
Oh, I think it's challenging to play, though, don't you?
Oh yeah, I mean, we must play it.
And especially when it's music of our own time, it's 20th century music. It's up to us, I guess, to play it.
The director of brass, Alec Wilson, formerly of the NBC Symphony under Toscanini, and Eugene Rittig, principal French horn of the CBC and Toronto Symphony Orchestras.
3, 4, 1.
Sidney Hart, Dean of Music at Carnegie Institute of Technology, formerly concertmaster of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra.
Thank you very much. Very well done, but remember what I said about not fucking the section. Now, that section is coming quite well in the Wagner. Don't forget the triplet. Yatatatam. Start that together. Let's take the Weber, please, now, Freischutz. You know, the passage at letter D, that's so tough. And it must be even, the second violins are sounding louder than the first here, because they have the toughest part, of course. Come on. Ta-ta-ta-ta-ya, ta-ta-ta-ya, ta-ta-ta. The separate notes.
Dear Mom, Swift Current was never like this. We live on the university grounds in Burwash Hall, to be exact, and I share a room with Jim Thompson. He's from Vancouver, and I like him very much, except that he makes life tough for a serious correspondent. Excuse me while I find a more peaceful spot. I guess you could say that most of the people here are dedicated, but I'm determined to get this letter written, even if I have to do it in the laundry room. Oh no, Bob Pott from Calgary. Well, that exhausts this building. Maybe there's a place over in the theater. The truth is, there are times when it would help to be over 20. And 6 feet tall, and play quarterback for the New York Philharmonic. That's a joke, Mom. Well, I guess the Edward Johnson building is the only place left. There can't be anybody practicing at this hour. Dear Mom, I'll write next week.
Pen again. And now go right ahead.
The second week, and the woodwinds were in orbit. The music, Holst's, the planets. The director of woodwinds, Arthur Crispin of Juilliard.
14. Give you 2 free measures. 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Yep. My friends, this will be different, I know, in a big hall, but those runs start piano, and then they build up. I don't think you did that at all. 12 before 5. And watch your act. Yum. Now piano. Now begin to build it up. Build it up. 1. Deep. Conductor solo. Good.
Oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and flutes. 2 floors above ground in the Edward Johnson building. And 2 floors below ground, in a room lined with mirrors, one of Canada's most beloved music teachers. Walter Joachim, principal cellist of the Montreal Symphony Orchestra and faculty member at the Quebec Provincial Conservatory.
Pizzicato accompaniments naturally are an imitation of the cymbalon. Huh? He does this. You know, this is a cymbalon. Well, an instrument with lots of strings on it, and he plays it with 2 hammers. They hardly can read music. You play anything with him, he accompanies you. See, a normal combination of a gypsy orchestra is the primash who does all the solo playing, the violinist. Now he starts, and all the rest accompanies. That's always the cymbalon player who sets the changes of harmonies. He does what the pianist does, you know, in a band, in a nightclub or in a restaurant. And they have a bass, a second violinist, and a viola. And they do. And when the fast dancers come, the bass player does, and all the others do. And the violinist and the clarinet very often, they go to town, play very fast. This is the idea of it. Come. Right from the, where we play in tempo. 4, 1, da-da-dum. It doesn't sound gypsy, it isn't loud enough. Shorter the notes. And. The second time when you play in 2 voices, it's better. But the first time it still sounds like, I don't know, a gypsy from Oshawa or something like this. This is not Hungarian yet. Come.
Some of the sectional rehearsals were strictly unscheduled. By the 3rd week, the broad outlines of the major works had taken shape, and the conductor could turn his attention to refinements of detail.
Just a moment, you'll have to play the little notes, the 16th note, with terrific vitality to come through. Otherwise, they won't come through the brass. She probably didn't understand it. Je dis tous les notes petites avec toute la vitalité. Let's go once more from
Miss Lise Amand,
5
age
again.
17, one of 11 orchestra members from La Belle Provence.
It must never...
Her family home is in Lévis, near the shores of the St. Lawrence River. But during the weeks of autumn and winter, she lives here, in a small room in the old quarter of the capital. For the serious student, it can be a life of some austerity. Simple meals prepared on a hot plate, gentle laughter shared with a neighbor's child.
Allô? Allô? Comment ça va? Tu veux que nous avons l'eau? On va aller. T'es bien pressé, matin? Viens.
Lise Amand is sustained by an atmosphere and by the disciplines of her conservatory. Her essential joy derives from music and from long walks through the streets of this most gracious of cities.
Ah, Québec, c'est magnifique.
Ah, Quebec is magnificent, particularly on a beautiful day like today. I love the Rue Saint-Louis, and especially the gate, to see the play of sunlight, the colors, and the birds.
J'aime énormément me promener sur la terrasse.
I love to walk on the terrace. It's how I first discovered Quebec when I was just a small child.
Québec est une ville formidable. Tu peux entendre.
Quebec is a marvelous town that can hear and see and feel so many things.
Surtout que
Especially where I'm going in the oldest part of the town, which has the most atmosphere and is almost always a revelation.
presque un émerveillement, une joie toujours
A
renouvelée.
pleasure relived every time I go to the conservatory, especially on a beautiful day like today.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Ça va bien?
A rendezvous with Marie-Paul Oudon, violinist with the National Youth Orchestra and a concert pianist in the making. For those who live near the provincial conservatory, be it in Quebec or Regina, Halifax or Toronto, obtaining musical coaching is a reasonably uncomplicated process. But for other Canadians living in the far places, the problems can be formidable. For example, David Watson of Dauphin, Manitoba. Since commencing lessons at an early age, he has journeyed more than 85,000 miles to and from his music lessons. Dauphin, Manitoba, some 200 miles northwest of Winnipeg and 25 miles south of Lake Winnipegosis. When I was 10, said David Watson, I used to take the train at 3 in the morning and go down to Winnipeg on the day coach. I took piano in the morning and French horn in the afternoon, and then caught the bus back home. Now that I have the family car, things are a lot simpler. Even in the winter when the prairie winds are pretty fierce and the temperature sometimes goes down to 40 below.
Hi, I'm home.
In the Watson home, there are 15 musical instruments, representing an impressive financial investment. A clarinet for students starts at $100. A new French horn in excess of $700. All members of the Watson family play one instrument or another, frequently 3 or 4, including Mrs. Watson, who also runs the commissary. David's father is a drill master in more ways than one. Evenings and weekends, he's assistant director of the Dauphin Town Band. During the days, he heads a busy dental clinic. For Watson Sr., the career decision has been made. For his son, the dilemma is becoming urgent: to seek the security of his father's profession or to enter the uncertain world of serious music. In the meantime, he helps finance his musical training by working as a lab technician. It may be of interest that his grandfather was the first sheriff of Dauphin. It's not known whether he was musical. This morning, the Brahms, said the notice board, on stage at 9. Some came running, including Miss Patricia Perrin, who earlier in the season electrified Massey Hall by playing a complex 2-piano work with Walter Susskind and the Toronto Symphony Orchestra.
I can see the section is going fine. Would you now go to the coda of the symphony at letter Q? 4 beats directly on letter Q. well, this is where we stop, and that will be enough for this afternoon. As you know, the rest of the afternoon is free, so you can go and relax. And only one thing, if we happen to meet somewhere, I don't want to hear a single word about music. All right? Good. Good afternoon.
Hey! Say, Patricia, by the way, in the second movement of the Shostakovich, when it goes...
On their afternoon off, some took to the water, others to the gymnasium. Paul Armin, viola, former gymnastic champion of Western Ontario. And his brother, Otto Armin, in the company of two other string players. Otto is concertmaster of the NYO and leading member of an outstanding string quartet, all of them from the same family. And violinist Philip Street of Guelph, both muscular and musical. On her free afternoon, Mademoiselle Lise Aimant went looking for the boutiques of Yonge Street. And Jamie Thompson achieved a lifelong wish to follow Toronto's subway system to its ultimate destination.
You're lost, Sandra?
Oh, yes,
Lost.
je suis partie.
Where did you want to go?
Oh, je voudrais aller au Burwash Hall. Please. Oh, Jimmy.
You were Purdue, now you are Duvet.
Oh.
It was a wonderful afternoon, which led to a wonderful evening in a barn on the outskirts of town. Suddenly it was the last week with 100 phrases yet to be polished.
Celestas, it's written.
Well, Pat, you can't play this on celeste as it's written because we can't take the celeste on tour with us. You've got to play the celeste and the glockenspiel on the glockenspiel.
A little more boisterous. Dum, ba, dim, ba-da-dum, bim, bim, ba-da-dum, bum, bum, ba-da-dum. Come on, enjoy yourself.
2 bars before 22, and be careful to come off together on the second beat of the second bar. Ready? Ready? And 2, 3, 4, crescendo, up.
Sing, sing, hold it,
The last day of rehearsal at the Edward Johnson Building. The tour just ahead, and work still to be done on the Shostakovich.
Go on.
Could you try that once more? It wasn't quite in tune. Just from the cello solo again, yes? That's it. Well, that was the best yet. Now, before I forget, I want to tell you a couple of things about how the concert will start, or what happens before we start. First thing is that I have to get out on the platform. That may be a little crowded, so I want you to be ready to let me through between the cellos and the violas. That's how I make my way. Then, as you'll be standing as I go on, remain standing for the national anthems, except I let the cellos sit down, but please do not sit down, the others. Only the cellos and the bassoons sit down, otherwise we have an eternal up and down, you see? You will remain standing. Then we play God Save the Queen, which we rehearsed yesterday, immediately, without sitting down in the meantime, followed by O Canada, which we haven't tried yet, so we'll try it now, and to get into the spirit, we'll stand up for it. O Canada, all right?
The tour began, as it would end some 3,000 miles later, in the pelting rain. The first concert was given in Stratford, Ontario, in the theater made famous by the kings and clowns of William Shakespeare. For the first time, concert dress. And for the first time, pre-concert nerves. They say that Glenn Gould is out front. How will he like it? Will he come backstage if he doesn't? What will I do if I trip over a cello? Well, if the maestro can stand it, I guess we can. As it happened, they left their nerves in the dressing rooms, and Johannes Brahms had another day of triumph. Later, the Toronto Star said of the Stratford concert, the orchestra wasn't just a bright group where the youngsters did very well, but was a brilliant instrument which tempted one to compare it with some of the best orchestras in the world. One astonished professional said, the trouble with these kids is they don't know how hard the stuff they're playing is. And Glenn Gould came backstage in a glowing mood. I hope you keep that special quality of yours, he told them. If you should ever stay together, you could become a great symphony orchestra. It was the fervent hope of everyone that the orchestra itself would remain, even though the young players would change many times in the years ahead. The second concert was given in Toronto's O'Keefe Centre. And 92 pieces paid their tokens and took their chances. For Otto Arman, it was a routine portage. And for Janie McAdam of Toronto, it was the beginning of 3,000 long miles of Tote That Bass. The O'Keefe Center, and a glittering audience, a pleasant mixture of culture, cafe society, and friends of good music. If Stratford had been the cultural big time, this was the tough town, where the knowing ones could break your heart with faint praise and careless wit. An attitude not shared by Sir Ernest and Lady Macmillan, patrons of the youth orchestra from its inception. The concert ended in ringing acclaim. Then 5 railway cars heading west attached to the Supercontinental. Out across the dairy acres of southern Ontario, onto the rocky ledges of the Laurentian Shield. The beginning of an intensive musical and personal experience for 92 young Canadians. The chief purpose of the financial investment by public bodies and private patrons across Canada, to expose promising young talent to the rigorous conditions of the performing arts in a country where the major centers may be over 1,000 miles apart. Winnipeg, for some, home again to the brief security of familiar surroundings. For others, new anxieties. Will this be the moment of truth here in the Midwest? What if nobody arrives? But somebody did. The largest audience ever to attend the Canadian Symphony concert in the wheat capital. The audience listened with obvious appreciation. Later at the Tribune, Roy Maley shared their enthusiasm. While over at the Free Press, Ken Winters had some thoughtful reservations. I admit it was partly the program that made me apprehensive about the orchestra's future. It so obviously was for show more than for rounded training. Kabalevsky's slam-bang Colas Brugnon Overture, Harry Summer's supersonic lyric, the glamorous excerpts from Holst's The Planet,
and even the Brahms Symphony are served up lushly at a Suskin, our fine showcase for instrumental sound. But where was the Bach Suite and the Haydn Symphony that would have taught the players so many, or of the other things they have to know?
Saskatoon, city of bridges on the banks of the South Saskatchewan, in the midst of the wheatlands where farmers think little of driving 100 miles to attend a concert. The stage was that of the Capitol Theatre, a movie house built in the days of Valentino and Theda Bara, just before the talkies put an end to a romantic era in modern theatre. In the warm darkness beyond this lobby, 1,000 Indians have bit the dust, and the chariots of Cecil B. DeMille were followed at a week's distance by the watery journeys of Captain Bligh. to this theater, with its echoes of all our yesterdays, came an unusual visitor. In his hands, an extraordinary instrument. An instrument made by the Italian violin maker Guarneri del Gesù in the early 18th century. A violin with a tone like the song of an angel. I almost fear to handle it, said Otto Armin. But you must play it, replied Stephen Caldenson. Play it tonight, and keep it with you till your tour is over. West again into the oil and cattle country. Edmonton, Alberta's capital, one of the twin cities of the New West. What you are observing, said Walter Susskind, is the transformation of the Canadian West. Just yesterday, this was the land of the buffalo and the Indian teepee. A half-century and 5,000 oil wells later, it's a land of free-flowing urban architecture and a striking palace devoted to the performing arts. The Northern Jubilee Auditorium, with 210 rooms to serve the needs of every conceivable form of theatrical presentation, including the young members of the NYO. During all of their Trans-Canada tour, with the drinking water as well as the scenery changing daily, not one member missed one moment of one concert, although some did require the ministrations of the orchestra's resident nurse. For the Edmonton audience, they programmed the Shostakovich, the Colas-Brugnon Overture, Harry Summers' Lyric, and an old friend, the Harry Janos Suite. Wide open spaces of the great indoors. Second home for many members of the West's new jet set. Oil and cattlemen familiar with the polar routes that lead from Edmonton's international airport to Europe and Asia. And their wives, familiar with symphony concerts in cities around the globe. day is it? What city are we in? Ah, yes. Tonight, the foothills. Later in the day, just off the Edmonton Trail that leads to Calgary, and then south to Texas, some Easterners discovered that the Old West is still there, lying in the long grass just off the highway. And later still, on the outskirts of Calgary, the four horsemen of the percussion section relived another phase of the Old West, including a reluctant timpanist. What do you mean you've never been on a horse? Partner, in these parts, there just ain't nobody that's never been on a horse. You just grab a holt with two hands, throw one leg over, and save the other one for jumping. And some while after dark, in Calgary's magnificent Southern Jubilee Auditorium, more than 3,000 people vied for 2,700 seats. And the entire audience responded with the greatest standing ovation accorded the orchestra on all of its journey. Said a cellist from Montreal, if this is Western hospitality, vive l'Ouest. North again to Edmonton, and then west across the plains into the Great Rockies, and west towards Jasper. And the first real symptoms of battle fatigue. If on a symphony tour the standing ovation is sometimes a reality, so is the upper berth just over the wheels and the constant ache between the shoulder blades. And still west toward the Yellowhead Pass and the Continental Divide. And the majesty of the high peaks, looked upon for the first time by many members of the NYO. What man first stood somewhere up here and said, we should put a railroad through and make a nation out of all this? The railroads just about did make one nation of us. But the men of those times knew that they were just building a skeleton, that the flesh would come later, when there'd be others to provide the real properties of civilization. Our own books and paintings, ballet and theater companies, and symphony orchestras worthy of a dual culture. And then down through the Selkirks and along the valley of the Fraser River, into that incredible world beside the Pacific Ocean. Seven years before, this project had been but a dream in the mind of Walter Susskind. The realization of this dream owed a great deal to 100 figures behind the scenes, and particularly to a special few who formed themselves into a National Youth Orchestra Association, made the plans, raised the funds, and launched the music train that led to these colorful Western streets. If there had been early doubts about such an extended tour for a group so young, there were doubts no longer. In Vancouver, a generous welcome from Mayor William Rathie, not only to the maestro, but to all his young associates. Then an invitation for a closer look at the concert hall, Vancouver's extraordinary Queen Elizabeth Theatre. A $6 million structure embracing the largest stage in Canada and one of the largest in the world. Word had spread that the NYO was worth hearing, and tickets were on a hard sell basis. The major work for the evening, the Shostakovich. And it was to be heard not only in the theater, but by radio up along the fjords and the mountain valleys of interior British Columbia. To the Vancouver ovation, Walter Susskind responded by saying, "You are an irresistible audience." The following night at Victoria's Butchered Gardens, the audience also proved irresistible. They came out of the woods and glades bearing picnic hampers, auto robes, and every known device that would protect against the intermittent rains. By the time of the concert, the orchestra's only outdoor appearance during the summer, the rains were over and dusk had fallen. And for the last time in that short, sweet summer, they played the Brahms. Played the Brahms with a dawning awareness that this was it. This was where the music stopped. Almost before we realized it, said Susan Holbrook, we were back on the ferry, heading east for the mainland. The maestro had left by air for other engagements. and we were alone, with no more music left to play. Why couldn't it go on like this all of the year? For all the years of one's life. Why does there have to be an end? Why does there have to be an end to the short, sweet summer of music? Tonight's Camera Canada production was made possible through the kind cooperation of the American Federation of Musicians of the United States and Canada.